his profession now for several years after making a change from being a licensed general contractor. Now you might think, well, what's the connection there? But you know, in the work of a general contractor, he learned the importance of integrity in dealing with subcontractors and clients to achieve a positive outcome. So in about, was it 2012?
It was,
Yeah. Okay. Doug made a career change to financial planning where some of the same skills and character qualities are important. He became a certified financial planner and a chartered retirement plan specialist. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Now, Doug believes good financial planning should reflect a client's values, vision, and goals. Now, he and his wife have four children, and he knows what it's like to live on a budget. So he's one of us, and I ask you to please give a warm welcome to Mr. Doug Dirksen.
Thank you, Chad. Is it okay if I call you Pastor Chad?
You call me anything you want.
Hey, thank you.
Here's water.
Appreciate you. Okay, that's great. I didn't really know how to articulate the connection between contracting and financial planning until tonight. So I'm grateful that you told me what that was. A little bit of housekeeping on the front end. I'm going to pass this around. So my broker-dealer requires that I obtain, it looks like the name, email, and phone number of those that are in attendance tonight so that I can submit it back to my compliance department. So I'll start that here. And if you'll pass it around, I need to grab my clicker. It's humbling to be introduced as a financial expert. I don't feel like a financial expert many days, and I'm going to go ahead and sit down. When I think about my own story with money, I grew up in Iowa in the northwest corner. My dad was a carpet layer. He owned a business where he sold carpet, and then he went out and installed it himself, and he did that for as long as I was a boy. And money lessons were not part of my upbringing, other than going to church and realizing that what I can do with money is to give it away, and I can save it, and I can spend it. And it was one of those three things that I was taught to do with money, and of course tithing was part of that early on in my journey. And it's reminiscent of, maybe some of you are familiar with Dave Ramsey, who has a radio show, and I like that he talks about that. What can you do with money? You can give it, you can save it, and you can spend it. So it's humbling to be introduced as an expert because I don't feel like I came from that. I've had to learn it over time. I have been in practice now for 12 years, a certified financial planner, which simply means that I've got the certifications. I've got like a master's degree in financial planning, and when I give advice, it's going to be like I would give it to my own family, to my clients. I need to do what is in their best interest, and that's the oath, so to speak, that I've taken as a certified financial planner. So tonight, as we go through our content, I like interaction. Please feel free to interrupt me, raise hands, ask questions along the way. I will get tired of listening to myself speak. Pastor Chad, how much time do we have tonight? Okay.
We'll see what kind of questions they have as we go.
Okay, great. So we can also be flexible with this tonight. I've got content on really 3 different subjects that we can cover. And we can go through the first part, and then I'll break for questions and answers. And then we can take just a little bit of a break from there, and we can move on to our second topic. I'm happy to take questions and answers after that, and we'll just see how it goes throughout the evening. So when I think about what is it that we're covering tonight, if we get through everything, we'll go through those 4 topics. What is financial planning? Why and how do we invest? How do we leave a legacy? And what are the role of annuities? Which is a topic that sometimes I cover and sometimes I don't, but I think annuities can be very helpful. So I wanted to make sure that we had that as part of our content for tonight. So This is not a sales pitch. This is the process that we use in our office when it comes to financial planning. There's 5 steps on that wheel, and then there's pictures of different moments and milestones in our lifetime that can be significant. So you see a wedding up there. I see somebody doing a tax return. There's a graduate with a diploma, celebrating around a table, buying a first home. Over on the far right, you see a caregiver and someone needing care. So those are all intended to articulate different times in our lives that are milestones. And we might look to them and say, oh yeah, that was the beginning of that part of my life, or I remember that specifically. The process that we use as we walk through financial planning through all of those times is that 5-step process where we take the time to uncover what's important to our clients. And once we uncover that, then we write it down. Because once we have a goal written down, I think we are at least halfway to accomplishing that goal. After we have the goal articulated, which is the second step there, then we can begin to create strategy. And once we've created a strategy, then we can implement that. And the way that we work with our clients is, okay, once we have implemented the strategy, we monitor it until the next time that we sit down and go through that process again. And that's usually at least annually. Sometimes it's every 6 months. Sometimes it's more frequently than that. But in a nutshell, that's how I view financial planning. If we're walking through that process on a consistent basis. Thank you. So I've got a map up on the screen there to talk about setting up financial goals like taking a road trip. And I love that map is England. I didn't mean to do that. That was an accident, but I can see Liverpool up there on the screen. If I asked each of you, what does it mean to have a goal without a plan? You could probably respond by telling me, well, it's a dream, or it's a wish, or it's something that's not going to happen. I think of a goal without a plan as really a plan to fail or to not achieve that goal. And when I think about the planning that we do, it does start with our values, like Pastor Chad said. And so examples of those values are integrity, humility, generosity, forgiveness. I get some strange looks sometimes from clients when I ask them, what values have guided you throughout your life? If you stop to think about that, because we don't often get people asking us that type of question. But then also, what are we growing into? What do we want to become more of? And I think both of those are important questions. Where have we been with our values, and what are we growing into? I know that loving my enemy is really hard to do. I know I am taught to do that. If I want to be like my Savior, he said, learn to love your enemies. Whew, that's a hard thing to do. But it's what I want to grow into. So if I've articulated that as my own value, how is it that I love my enemy? And sometimes my enemy are just the people that annoy me. Sometimes those that annoy me are just the ones in my family. Okay, well, at least I know I've got a goal to shoot for. Then I can start asking, okay, how is it that I put structure onto that goal? Our values are wonderful to talk about, and we interact with people in our lives, right? And that's where those values are played out. And so those people can often be our family, our friends, our larger community, our churches. And then finally, within our plans, we also talk about the organizations that matter to us. And we have many good nonprofit organizations in Colorado Springs. And what I love about good organizations that are managed well, that have a clear goal in mind, is that teams that are run well can accomplish what we cannot accomplish on our own. All of these things can be in a financial plan. What are my values? What am I moving into? Who are the people that I care about? And what do I want to say to them? And are there organizations that have captured my heart that I want to support with my financial plan? So each of those can go into that. So discovery is getting started on the journey. Writing the plan down, or articulation, is planning the journey. And if any of us were on an adventurous road trip, we wouldn't start that without first consulting a map and looking at where are we now and where do we want to go. That allows us to select our destination, but it also allows us to plan stops along the way. I don't enjoy road trips very much anymore where it's just get from here to here as fast as I can. I've had plenty of those with 4 kids growing up where we're going to see family. Now I would rather plan a route where I know I can make a stop, pull over, rest for the evening, maybe see something of interest along the way. And that's a fun part of road trips. Well, that can also be a part of our financial plans. There are what I consider to be 5 pillars of financial planning. I've already mentioned values, which you see up there as number 1. 4 other pillars of financial planning include investment management, and we'll get into that more in detail tonight. Risk mitigation, and really I think of that as insurances. What happens if I get a diagnosis that I wasn't anticipating? Can I cover it out of my own investments, or do I need to have insurance for that? What happens if I get an auto accident? What if I'm responsible for that and I have to pay a settlement? Do I have that potential risk covered? What if I'm not able to take care of myself? What if I need a hip replacement and I need care at home? Or what if I need to move into a facility? I've had 2 grandmothers that have walked that road. Do I have that cost accounted for and covered? So all of that falls under that third option there, risk mitigation. And then also, when it comes to financial planning, being smart with taxes and thinking about our legacy are key components. And that's numbers 4 and 5 up on the screen. So I'll turn my attention now to investment management first. Well, first, a little bit more detail on each of these, and this is sticking with the road trip theme. So once we've taken a look at a map, we've figured out where is it that we want to go, what's our destination, where are we going to stop along the way. Investment management is almost like deciding what kind of vehicle are we going to drive. Are we getting in an RV? Are we going to be going slowly, driving at 55? Are we getting in a sedan? Are we getting in an SUV? We're going to be able to go 85 down the road. How quickly do we need to get to our destination? There's always unexpected things that come up, right? So I've got weather delays and road closures as an example up there. But in the finance world, that's often what are the markets doing? Or what expenses have popped up in my life that I wasn't anticipating? A lot of times that's around health for ourselves or for our loved ones. Tax smart planning, I think about like vehicle maintenance. I've got my car, it's running well at the beginning of the trip. How do I make sure it stays that way so that I'm efficient with my fuel usage? Taxes can be like a stiff wind that I'm driving into. What if I waited a day and the wind changed and I was able to have the wind at my tail instead? So that can be similar to how we can focus on taxes. And then finally, legacy planning. I mentioned that already. What are we communicating to others as we take our trip along the way? So legacy planning for me is not just what will my kids and my wife remember about me when I'm gone? What do they remember about me yesterday? What did I tell them about my hope? And what is it that I believe? And what's their recent memory of me that way? I want to make sure that I'm building a legacy along the way as well as with what I leave to them. I'll pause there for a moment. Does that bring up any questions? Any comments? Anything along those lines? Okay. So now I'll dig a little bit into investment management. There's a funnel on the right side of that screen, and it's intended to present the picture of thousands of different investments that are available. There's a large universe of investments. And part of our responsibility to clients is to filter those investments. And we do that first by looking for those that have a good track record. Once we know that an investment has a good track record, we look for an efficient cost structure. because each investment has a different cost associated with it. After we find those that have efficient cost structures, then I look at what do my clients need to achieve to reach their goals. Will a 4% rate of return allow them to achieve their goal? Do they need 5 or do they need 6%? Each of those rates of return have different varying degrees of volatility and risk that go along with it. So a required rate of return is an important consideration. And then finally, what's our investment personality? One of the worst things I can do as an advisor is to encourage a client to be in an investment portfolio that when the market drops, because we always go through market drops, it's too much of a down on the roller coaster ride, and then they come back to me and say, Doug, we've got to make a change. We can't stay with this. I don't want my clients to sell when the markets are down. That's one of the worst things I can do. So that investment personality is the last key important piece to coming up with a custom strategy for investments. Okay, this touches a bit on what is it that we can do with money. I touched on this earlier. Actually, I put one more in there. So we can give, we can spend, we can save, and I put also that we can invest. And how do these interact with how we need money throughout our lifetime? Well, when we're meeting our own needs, we're spending for the things that we need to live on a daily basis. We're saving for the future, for rainy days, and we're investing. When we meet others' needs, it's the same. We're saving and investing, but we're also giving away instead of spending on ourselves. Jack Bogle was the founder of Vanguard. He died in 2017. And I've got a quote from him there that says, "The biggest risk facing investors is not earning sufficient return on their capital as it accumulates." Basically what he was saying is the cost of living is going to go up over time. How do we stay ahead of that cost of living? Oftentimes just putting money in a checking or savings account, even if it's a high yield savings account like we have today, is not going to keep up long term with inflation. It's wonderful to be able to go to a bank and get a CD for 4 or 5% today. For most of my career in finance, that number has been more like 1 or 2%. And it's only been recently that those rates have gone up. But even with those higher rates in CDs, they're probably not going to keep up with inflation. In 2022, inflation was at 8%. Well, 5% sounds good, but not when I'm still falling behind by 3% every year. And so his point, the founder of Vanguard, was we have to invest because otherwise we won't be able to keep up with inflation over time. So the things we can do with money are up there. Of course, we can meet our own needs with it. We're called to meet our needs and to consider the needs of others and the interests of others. And investing to stay ahead of inflation is one of the ways that we can have more capacity to do that. Okay, I feel like the 4Runner is a fairly ubiquitous vehicle in Colorado. I see them everywhere on the road. An example of inflation, in 2000, you could have bought a 4Runner for about $27,500. And I did a search to find out, okay, what is that same Toyota 4Runner going for right now? And it's about $42,500. And that annual compound increase is about 2%, 1.84. That's actually not too bad when I think about inflation. I tend to think of inflation as being more like 3 or 3.5%. Those little percentages make a big difference. Interestingly enough, the Federal Reserve's mandate from Congress is twofold. One is to keep unemployment down, so seek maximum employment is the first half of the mandate, and then also keep inflation at a reasonable rate. And the Fed sees that reasonable rate as 2%. So if you look just at the Toyota 4Runner, good job, Fed. You're doing what you need to. Yeah, good job, Toyota. Okay, so that's vehicles. But if we think about healthcare, those costs rise more quickly. So the annual cost for healthcare has been more like 5%. And this is actually the number that I use when I estimate Medicare premiums, Part B, Part D, Medigap coverage, out-of-pocket costs for health insurance or for health care. 5.1 is the number that I'm currently using. What that means today is that a family of 4, if they were paying $1,600 a month for health insurance, and oftentimes their employer is covering a good portion of that, but that's the cost if they were to go into the marketplace to buy health insurance. 20 years ago, or 24 years ago, that would have been about $500 a month. It's pretty staggering when I think about what is that cost today. And then it's even more staggering when I think about what are my kids going to be facing as they enter the workforce. $4,300 a month for that family of 4. So that's the effect of that inflation on healthcare. Again, back to the point of why do we need to invest? This is one of the dilemmas that we face. I won't get too into details on the causes of inflation tonight, but I have a few on the screen there. So are we demanding more? Right? The laws of supply and demand. If as a population we demand more of a good or service, good chance that cost is going to go up. What about businesses? Are they supplying more or are they supplying less? If they're supplying more, the costs will go down. If not, then the costs are going to increase. Wages, are those increasing? If they are, I'm probably able to pay more for that same goods and services. It's an interesting topic to think about when both spouses in a household entered the workforce. What did that do to prices? And did we ever come back from that again? Expectations. Am I thinking, it's normal to pay 4% more, 5% more for groceries, for bread? Am I willing to do that? I'm probably not going to skimp on groceries, but maybe that new vehicle I would choose not to pay for.
Speaking of groceries, is it possible with as it come down, still understand inflation?
It is.
So groceries could come down?
Yeah. The question is, can groceries come down? Because all we've seen lately is that they go up, and they've gone up a lot. Yeah. Yep. That's a good, they're included in some measures of CPI and not all. But yes, it is possible, just not very common to see it. Yep. Being a contractor, I had my eyes on sheets of OSB at Home Depot during COVID, and they went from $8 a sheet to $64 a sheet. Unreal. They're not back to $8 a sheet. I think they're probably around 20 to 24.
So why does it pay meet the expectation? I'm not going to get political.
Sure. Why doesn't pay meet the expectation or the extra costs? Whew. That's how to answer that question. Yeah. I mean, the bottom line is companies charge more without paying their workers the commensurate amount. They're profiting more at that point. Back to investing. They do. Yep. Yeah, so the
If we can, hold your questions until you have a microphone so we get this on the recording.
Just from the producer's point of view, the cost, like for instance, cost of groceries, cost of fertilizer went up tenfold, 3 years ago, from $900 an acre, to almost $9,000 an acre. And so you look at production, cost of diesel, has, you've seen it, it's gone up at least, 40%. So the cost of producers, energy-wise, cost of labor and stuff has gone up. And so from what I've been hearing, the actually profit margins of the people who are selling groceries is only 2%. And that has not gone up. And so they are selling more their own brand stuff. People are buying less name brand and going with store brands to try to save money or shopping at Costco. Farmers are not making more money.
Inflation, instead of inflation affecting farmers the same way, like he's saying, the cost of everything, farmers aren't getting paid more for their wheat they're producing. My kids are in farming, so, you know, I've had a background in livestock and things. And the producers are not the one making the money. It's the middleman. And until that gets squared away and prices do come down, the people that are supplying you with the food you eat, that supply is going to go down because they can't afford, with government regulations and things, to produce more. So if they don't produce more, there's not more supply out there. So it's gonna cost you more in the grocery store.
They take acreage out of production because they can't afford to grow it.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and it's a good point. Then I ask, okay, if producers aren't getting paid more, and the middleman perhaps is, what caused the prices necessarily to go up for that grocer? Or I think about lumber. Why did lumber become more expensive? Was it simply labor? And they just didn't have as much labor through COVID? It's interesting to think about billions of people interacting every day, which ends up in trillions of interactions globally. Really, that's the economy when we think about it. And it's complex, and it's not binary, and you can't simply pull a lever over here and expect this to change. I know I'm preaching to the choir on that one. Each of those four, demand, supply, wages, expectations, I have some responsibility in those. Companies have some responsibility. The supply chain does. Money supply and interest rates, those are on the Fed. How much money supply do they have? And what are they doing with interest rates? And of course, as they lower rates, it's easier to access capital, which tends to be more inflationary. And as they raise rates, it tends to slow that inflation down, and that's what they're watching for right now, is inflation, backing off and getting closer to the targets that they're aiming for. I had a real problem with the Troubled Asset Relief Program before I got into finance. This was back in 2007, 2008. I was a contractor then, and I remember hearing about these banks that were too big to fail, and how there was all kinds of federal stimulus that was put in to bail out activity that I just thought was irresponsible at that point. That was about $700 billion that went into the economy through TARP, that Troubled Asset Relief Program. The Federal Reserve put between 4 and 5 trillion into the economy through COVID and through the shutdowns that we had after COVID. These are staggering numbers, and I had someone ask me today, what about our currency? What about the value of the dollar? Are we devaluing it? Can we reasonably hope that we're going to still have a dollar that's worth something? That's a big topic as well. I don't like deficit spending. We can't do it in our homes. We can't just rack up credit card debts and never pay them off. Sure, the Fed has more leniency than we do individually within our homes. But it's just interesting to think about the stimulus and the deficit spending that we've seen increase even just over the last 25 years. Did that have some role to play in all the inflation, the 8% inflation in 2022? I'm sure it did. But there were many other factors as well. I'll move on from inflation, but if there's any other comments or questions, please let me know. The bottom line, if inflation continues to follow what it has in the past, is if we have $100 in our pocket today, in 2044, that'll be about $52. So our purchasing power reduces by almost 50%, roughly every 20 years. And that's the reality of inflation. 3.28% is what the Bureau of Labor Statistics quotes on that. So I'm going with the assumption here, of course, that we have to invest to stay ahead of it. Inflation creates a problem for us when we keep our money in checking and savings and CDs, because those things don't keep up with the cost of living when we invest in the companies that are part of the U.S. economy, we often see that they are participating in rising prices, in higher revenue, their share values are increasing, and therefore our account balances are increasing. So inflation is not the same problem for stock investors specifically as it is for those that are invested only in savings and checking and CDs.
Doug, could
Yeah.
it be that someone has sufficient assets that they might feel most comfortable in a fixed rate of return because their money will last as long as they do?
Very good question, certainly. Yep. That's a very fair question. I have plenty of clients that are comfortable with that.
Most of us don't.
And that also leads somewhat into annuities, which we can touch on, because typically annuities, there's various structures, and they tend to be less growth-oriented than stock investments, but they are a way to guarantee income and to reduce some of the risk of what's going on in the stock market. Okay, so the question.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Doug, I had a question.
Yeah.
You mentioned checking and savings and CDs versus stock accounts.
Yeah.
But what about precious metals like gold and silver, and how does inflation affect those?
Yeah, great question. So there are many that would say that precious metals are a good store of value. And if you look at the price specifically of gold since the turn of the century, over the last 25 years, you've seen a spike in that. If you draw that performance back out over several decades, if you go back 40 or 50 years, the rate of gold has probably been less than 3%, which is why Warren Buffett would say, hey, I don't own commodities. It's also why he said, I'm not getting into cryptocurrencies, because it behaves somewhat like a commodity. So I have clients that own it. I have most of my clients that own precious metals want to have it in their hands because they like that tangible feel. Sometimes they'll put it in their portfolios through something called an exchange traded fund. And then in my mind, it becomes what we call a non-correlated asset. So you might see stocks dropping, or even like in 2022, both stocks and bonds were dropping, but precious metals may have stayed consistent. So if I've got a sleeve that's in a portfolio, 15%, 10%, something like that, it can help with those down periods in the market. Protecting our account balances when the markets go down, I would say, is equally as important as just going for growth.
What about real estate as an investment?
Yep. Also a good asset class. So we can own real estate, we can own a rental home, we can have physical land or a property, receive rental income, and then look for appreciation. And I would say the long-term rate of appreciation on real estate has probably been 4 to 5% nationwide. We've seen a lot more than that in Colorado Springs in the last 7 or 8 years. Property values have doubled, and that means more like a 10% rate of return on real estate.
Yeah.
Yep. Are we in a bubble with that? I don't know. Time will tell, and the Lord knows. But it's certainly been higher than normal the last decade. And not just the Springs, that's everywhere that I see nationwide. Even back where I'm from in Iowa, I see prices have gone up significantly. Real estate can be added to portfolios. It doesn't have to be a physical piece of land that you own. There are funds that invest specifically in real estate. And so that's an option as well.
REIT?
REITs, yep, real estate investment trusts. Yep, certainly a possibility. This was a little bit more basic. Just thinking about when we invest, what do we do? If I boiled it down to 2 words, we own things and we lend when we invest. And so ownership gets into what are the things that we can own. So I put intangibles at the top of that list, like our relationships and our health and our education. Those are important assets. And one of my favorite Buffett quotes is that the government can't tax is your education. Improving our minds, I think it's excellent at any age. Tangibles that we can own, homes and land, real estate is there, personal items. Art can be an asset class to itself. I'm not a connoisseur, so don't come to me for art advice. Vehicles, once in a while, right? We get into classic vehicles, those can appreciate in value and not simply depreciate. Commodities, precious metals, checking and savings and cash. And then I put businesses on there, and I put it last, because that's where I'm going next, is what does it mean to own stock? One last comment on commodities. So I had a client that bought some silver with me probably 15 years ago, and it was directed by him. I didn't encourage him to buy it, and we just watched that silver bounce around. It didn't gain any value for about a decade until finally he said, okay, that's it, I'm out. Okay, so if I think about what is stock, this may be basic for some of you, but it's really business ownership. And I could own an interest in a local restaurant. I own my wealth management business, so that's kind of like owning private stock or private equity. But most of what I help clients with are the big names that we know within our households, and that's public stock or public equity. There's over 6,000 public companies currently, and that number fluctuates over time. So in 2016, I think that number was closer to 3,500. But there have been more offerings since 2016, and there's more companies that we can invest in. So some common name examples would be Ford, Microsoft, Procter & Gamble is a company behind many of the grocery names that we know. McDonald's, Walmart, and Amazon. Some of those are younger, some of those are older. But examples of large public companies that we probably interact with on a regular basis, almost every day. Why own businesses? Why own stock? Well, as you can see at the bottom of that slide, I think of it as similar to rental homes. If we invest in good quality companies, their earnings are going to go up over time, which means their share price will increase. That is, in my opinion, probably the greatest factor that will help keep us ahead of inflation over time. I'm also a fan of dividend-paying stocks. And dividends are one of those return of a portion of profits from a company that the board of directors for that company will vote on and decide, are we going to keep it consistent? Are we going to lower it? Are we going to increase it? So by no means is it an obligation. If I go in and buy Microsoft and it's paying 0.75% right now in its dividend, my hope is that they'll increase it over the next 10 years and that I'll get a larger percentage of their profits over time. But it's no guarantee, right? The board of directors could cut that next year. They could eliminate it altogether. So one of the things we look for are, do companies have a history of increasing their dividends? What I can tell you is that those companies that were able to increase their dividends through the 2008 financial crisis are stable. They have a lot of free cash flow, and they tend to do better than the overall market as a whole. Is that history choppy? If so, maybe the company and its management isn't quite as stable. And maybe I'm taking on more risk. Maybe I'm looking for more price appreciation, if that's the case, because I'm not going to get as much of a consistent income stream from those dividends. But when I think about why would I own public companies, it's because it's similar to rental houses. If I have a renter, I get income from that renter, and it's consistent. Hopefully they're good renters, and I don't have to worry about replacing the carpet and redoing the paint. But I'm also hoping that my home value is going to go up over time, and that 10 years from now or 20 years from now, I'll be able to sell it for more than what it's worth today. Bottom line, that's what public companies are doing as well. I had a mentor in the business that said, what's the best way to grow wealth over time? And she said, real estate, public companies, and private companies. It still sticks with me today.
Doug, you know, most of us are probably not holding any individual stocks, but can you explain how stocks usually comprise mutual funds that are probably better known to us.
Yes.
Am I jumping?
Just barely.
Okay.
Just barely. Let me circle back to that one.
Sure.
All right, so I'm going to move away from ownership for a moment and go to lending. When we buy a CD or when we buy a bond, we're really buying someone's promise to repay that money to us with interest over time. There's a term associated with that CD or bond, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. I'm going to receive interest. So if I put $10,000 into a CD paying 5%, I get $500 a year. And at the end of the year, I trust the bank's going to pay me that back, and I'm going to get my capital back again. So a bank CD is one way to think about that, but also purchasing bonds, we can lend to various institutions. Back to the banks for a minute. Another interesting concept is to think about banks are able to lend 10 times their deposits, right? We have a marginal banking system in the U.S. So this is something that's allowed, and it's why a run on a bank is a risk over time, because banks don't have all of those deposits at any given point in time because they're lending them out. So if I put my money in at the bank and they pay me 5%, they're able to take that number and multiply it by 10 and then go out and lend that to others to help to stimulate the economy. Part of what the bank has to do is assess, okay, is that risk worthy? Am I protecting my depositors with that? You know, will this person make their car payments on time? Will this business owner be able to make that payment on that business loan? Will the mortgagee be able to make their payments? That's the math that the bank has to do. It's an interesting business, though, to think about, yeah, those deposits can be multiplied by 10, and then that's what they're able to go out and earn their rate of return on. So various institutions, sorry, I went back to banks, now back to bonds here for a moment. We can lend our money to the U.S. Treasury, and those can be Treasury bills or Treasury notes, Treasury bonds. Each of those have different maturity lengths to them. Treasury money market is a common instrument because it usually matures within 30 days or less. And for example, right now, Treasury money market is paying a little bit over 5%. So I can put my money in a money market fund that is not a bank-insured CD, but if I needed it next week, I also don't have to worry about a penalty for going back to the bank and saying, hey, I need, some of that money back out again. The trade-off with that is that those rates will move up and down over time, whereas the bank CD will be locked in for a year or 2 years or however long the term is. So that's one of the risks that I have to assess and say, is it worth having liquid money that's earning a good rate of return now, but maybe won't be earning as great in 6 months? Or do I tie that money up, give it to the bank, and then know that I have that rate for the next 12 months? Government agencies like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are also considered to be very stable bond investments. I would say U.S. Treasury bills and bonds are probably considered to be the most stable assets in the world. Government agencies aren't far behind on that. We can lend money to municipalities, so state, county, or city. Those are known as municipal bonds, and the income from that is federally tax-free. So that can also be a consideration to be thinking about, especially when I have clients that are maybe in the 24 or the 32% tax bracket, and we're looking at how do we lower taxable income on a portfolio. McDonald's will sell me a bond. So I don't know if Amazon will, but companies also will raise money for their own operations. And they'll do that by selling bonds. So it's interesting that I could be a stockholder of a company. I could also be a bondholder of that same company. And they're obligated to pay that bond back to me. The stock price may go up or down, and I have no guarantee on what that will be, but there is an obligation that they pay that bond back to me. We can also lend money to foreign governments and corporations. So international bonds or world bonds are an asset class that we can invest in. So I'll pause there for a moment. Does that bring up any questions or comments?
You know what I think about the last one.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Lending, CDs, bonds, just a recap of what we covered. Ownership. Why would we own something? We're hoping for the price to go up, and perhaps we're also hoping for income. Lending, we're looking probably more for interest income and a safe return of our principal. If I put $10,000 into the investment, that's what I'd like to get back out 3 years from now or 5 years from now, and I'd like to get some income along the way. Both of these have a track record of beating inflation over time. And I'll pull that up on a slide later. But if inflation has averaged about 3%, bonds have probably done about 6% if I look back over 100 years. Large company stocks in the U.S., throughout its ups and downs, throughout the crises that we've had, have averaged about 10%. And then those companies that are emerging within the U.S., the small size companies, have averaged more like 12% a year. Okay, so mutual funds. How do we access these investments? Most of us don't just have a stock and bond portfolio. We have mutual funds within our accounts. Mutual funds are, I love Dave Ramsey's definition of that, which is that mutual funds are something that I'm going to skip right through this. Well, no, I'll back up for a minute. How do we access ownership investments or lending investments? We can do it on our own through individual ownership. That would be shares of stock. Or, for example, if I buy a municipal bond, I have to put at least $5,000 in to be able to purchase that municipal bond. So I can do that on an individual level. If I do that, it's concentrated. If I put a lot of money into one specific stock or company, boy, I sure hope that stock does well. I hope that company does well, because I got a lot riding on that one. Group ownership looks more like mutual funds, or they have a cousin in the market. Some of you are probably familiar with exchange-traded funds, or ETFs. And both of those, when I buy a single share of a mutual fund or an exchange-traded fund, I'm going to have access to dozens of investments that are inside that fund from day one. So the business-specific risk of owning an individual stock is pretty much eliminated when I buy a mutual fund. Because now, if I put $100 into that fund, maybe 100 different companies have $1 of my money. So both of those provide built-in diversification. Mutual funds can hold a variety of assets. So they can have stocks, they can have bonds. I can have mutual funds that are focused specifically on commodities or currencies. There's mutual funds that have private equity. There's funds that blend all of these together. Companies, mutual funds are actually known as investment companies, and they're governed by an act from 1940. These companies can hire managers to invest those funds, and then we have to ask the question of, are they worth it over time, right? If I'm paying a portion of what I've invested to the managers in those mutual funds, if that's 0.5%, or if it's 1% of what I've invested, do I think they're going to do a good enough job and meet my objectives within that fund for me to pay that to them? Each fund, and there are, I want to say there's 7,000 mutual funds available, 6,000 public companies, more mutual funds available than there are public companies. Each one has their specific objectives and their cost, their managers listed in the prospectus. It's pretty dry reading, but it's there. It's all there for us to be able to go through. When I place an order in a mutual fund, the markets are trading throughout the day. Mountain Time, they open at 9:30, they close at 7:30, they close at 2 p.m. And that's meant to mimic 9:30 and 4 on the East Coast. If I buy a mutual fund at 7:30 in the morning, it will fill after the market closes at the end of the day, and then I'll be an owner the next day of those shares of the mutual fund. Part of that is because there's a manager that has to go in and purchase the underlying investments with my deposit for that day. I don't have control over what that manager does. They're making the decisions about what to buy and what to sell on any given day. Sometimes that generates capital gains within the portfolio. And that can mean that those investments can be less tax efficient because I don't have control over when those gains are realized. I'll pause there.
Doug, what is capital gains?
Capital gains. If my capital grows, the government wants a portion of it. They're probably some of the most tax-friendly laws that we currently have and have had for decades. So if my wife and I sell our home and it's appreciated by $400,000, the current law is I don't have to worry about paying taxes on that $400,000. There's an exemption up to $500,000 for married couples. If I own a stock or a mutual fund and I put $10,000 into it and it's not in a 401k, or it's not in an IRA, it's simply in a brokerage account, and the share prices go up to $15,000, and then I say, okay, time to buy my daughter a car. When I sell that, the $5,000 is realized capital gains, and then I have to pay tax on that. Well, the nice thing about that, if I sell the investment, I control when I pay tax on it. If I hold it for more than a year, I pay a more favorable rate of tax on that than if I sold it before the year was up. Within a mutual fund, I don't control that. So often what happens is those mutual funds will generate short-term capital gains. Those are taxed just like if I'd earned that income at a job. And so it can be a headwind on the performance of that fund, almost like if I was sailing into a stiff wind. Yeah. Half of that. Yep.
250?
Yep.
Okay.
No. Primary home. I want to say primary and secondary. And my caveat here is I'm not a tax professional. So I'll have to say go back and check with your tax professional or software if you use it. But my understanding is primary home, secondary home, you can avoid that. If you've got rental property, commercial real estate, land, farmland. No. Possibly. Yep. How about it depends? Will that suffice for an answer?
Good, safe
A
answer.
good, safe answer. I can't say safe ever, except that maybe there. One other thing about capital gains is if I have farmland and my kids inherit it, right now they get a step up in the basis. So if let's say I inherited it from my dad, and it was worth $200,000 when I inherited it, and now it's worth $2 million. And now my kids inherit it from me, and they decide that's it, we're done with the farm. 5 years after I'm gone, they sell it for $2.5 million. My question would be, their taxable gain, right? Is it $2.5 million minus $200,000, what I inherited it for? Or is it $2.5 million minus $2 million, what they inherited it for? And the answer is the second one. So that step up in basis to whatever the market value was on the date of my death, or 6 months later, one of those two dates, is what they get to use. So in that way, real estate can be very useful if you're able to hand it down to beneficiaries. Correct. Yep. Correct. And the capital gains, the long-term capital gains rate is less than the money that if I'm out earning right now, that's taxed as ordinary income, and those rates are higher, and capital gains is a lower rate. So generally, capital gains are a good thing if I can realize them as long as they're over a year. Sometimes, if a joint household doesn't have enough income to get into the 22% ordinary bracket, capital gains is zero at that point. That joint income is close to $90,000 a year in taxable income. So, such a fun puzzle to put together. Spending, investments, taxes. I never get bored at work. So, mutual funds. Other questions on that? Anything that I'm missing that you would add to that? If not, I'll move on. So exchange-traded funds are more of a recent phenomenon, and by recent I mean a few decades old. Well, not even that. I want to say maybe 1970 is when the first exchange-traded funds came on the market, but they've become a lot more popular even just in the last 10 years. They're similar to mutual funds. If I buy a share of an exchange-traded fund, I get little pieces of all the underlying assets in that fund. Many of them are passively invested. So the investment company might say, hey, we're going to set up a fund that's going to mirror this particular index. Or we're going to set up our filters for certain types of stocks, and then we're going to let the computers do the work and select the stocks that meet our filters. We don't have somebody making day-to-day decisions about, do I buy or sell this? Because that, their internal costs can be lower.
Doug, what do you mean by index?
The S&P 500 is a common name, and that's an index. 500 of the largest companies in the United States, that's one index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, another common name, is 30 companies. There are indexes that have thousands of companies in them, and that's meant to give more of a broad feel for the entire market. But these funds can be set up to mirror. You'll always hear a disclaimer of you can't invest directly in an index, and that's true. But you can invest in a fund that mirrors that index and does it for a very, very low cost. Maybe 0.05% or less, whereas a mutual fund might charge 1%. Well, the difference in those costs is 20-fold. If I think about it, that exchange-traded fund can be much less expensive. Really makes you wonder, is that mutual fund manager worth it? Can they do their job well? Trades on exchange-traded funds. If I buy an exchange-traded fund at 7:30 in the morning, I own it at 7:30 in the morning. So it trades throughout the day, and that's the same as individual stocks. If I go in and buy Microsoft at 8 a.m., I own it at that time. There's no waiting until the end of the day. And they must have had a good lobby in Congress because exchange-traded funds just get better treatment when it comes to taxes. I won't go into the details of bundling and unbundling securities within exchange-traded funds, largely because I don't know how it works. That's for somebody else to understand. But the underlying securities are not bought and sold in an exchange-traded fund if I go to the manager and say, hey, I need to take my money out of this fund. They don't actually have to sell the underlying securities. No capital gains occur if that's the case. And so that doesn't affect other shareholders of that exchange-traded fund. So you could have lower costs, you can have better tax efficiency within exchange-traded funds. So important things to consider. Questions, comments on that? A lot of times when we build portfolios, we've got mutual funds and exchange-traded funds both within there. Because there are some good managers out there that are worth their salt. So a quick recap, types of investments, and this is by no means everything that's available, but ownership through stocks and lending my money through bonds are two very common types of investments. I can access both of those through mutual funds or through exchange-traded funds. So that's great. Got a sense for what those investments are. How do they come together to actually make up an account or a portfolio? What a mess. You know this one. Call this my jelly bean chart. All right, so this chart's going back 20 years. That side is 2023. This side is 2004. It's nice to be able to look at it like this, because if I were to ask you in 2024, the column that hasn't been created yet, which one of those is going to be on top? We don't know. We have a good sense maybe in August which ones might finish toward the top. But you can see some years you've got red that's in the top half. Those are international stocks. Some years you've got purple.
What do some of those say?
Yeah.
What do those represent?
So the red are international stocks.
Okay.
Yep. The purple's up there too sometimes, but you can see in the middle of that chart, purple's down there at the bottom 5 years in a row. That's gold and silver and commodities. It's cattle, it's grain futures. It's kind of a basket of all of those together. The yellow in there is cash, checking and savings deposits or CDs. Sometimes it's up there at the top. 2018, 2022 were good years for cash. 2008, when the rest of the market was dropping, cash was not a bad place to be then. But it's mostly toward the bottom. And that's why it's not keeping up with inflation over time.
Which one is large cap?
Depends which one you want, growth or value. But they're both, if you look all the way at the right, that's the 20-year average. And large cap is the top two. Well,
And Doug, I'm sorry, I should have not used jargon. So explain what large cap funds are.
large cap is those two, small cap is that one right there. All right, so thanks for asking that question because I love going down that road. Large company is large cap. Large cap stocks are companies that are worth more than $10 billion on the open market. And when you think about how do you put a number to a company, it comes down to their earnings. That's largely what will drive a company's value over time. The largest companies right now are worth over $3 trillion. And these would be some of the tech companies like NVIDIA and Apple, Microsoft. These are the biggest companies in the world at this point in terms of weighting. So those are considered large. Those tech companies even have maybe a category where you could call them mega cap stocks. The second one on that far right column, which is the 20-year average, are small cap stocks. And those are typically going to be worth $2 billion or less. Right, small. $2 billion sounds pretty big to me. But in the comparative world of public companies, they're small. Those are the companies that a lot of times are doing new research. They're bringing new services and new goods to the economy. And because they might come on something that just gets really hot and grows quickly, they tend to be one of the best performers.
Example?
Super Microcomputers is a company that just recently went from a small company to joining the S&P 500. Now they're a large cap, but they have a lot to do with artificial intelligence and working closely with NVIDIA in developing the chips that drive artificial intelligence. It's interesting to note Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway, which is a conglomeration of many different companies, was considered a mid-cap stock. So not large, not small, but for most of my career it was a mid-cap stock. It's a large company now. So what is that jelly bean chart for? The point of that is to say we don't know what's going to be at the top from one year to the next. I like to quote Ecclesiastes. I think it was Solomon who wrote it, but give a portion to 7 or 8, for you don't know what disaster will occur on the earth. For me, is a case for diversification. The Lord does not tell me what to expect this coming year. I know I have his promises that I can stand on, but I don't know what, is it large cap that's going to be better, or is it cash this next year? So it's hard to see there, but the black square in each year is never at the top and it's never at the bottom because it's a mix of all of them together. It's a diversified portfolio.
What is it?
Yep. Question was, which one is it?
Yeah, is it a blended fund? What is that? I can't read it.
Yeah, it just says diversified portfolio on it. And I apologize for how blurry that is. Our PowerPoint didn't work very well. The point with a diversified portfolio is you're never going to be at the top of the market making a killing, but you're also never going to be at the bottom of the market wishing that you'd done something different. And it's a very good way to set up an investment strategy in a portfolio to say, okay, what does this ride look like over time? So when we think about how do mutual funds, exchange traded funds, stocks and bonds come together, I'm working with different variations of that black box for my clients. And sometimes we turn up the volume, so to speak, and we go for more growth by putting more stocks in there. Sometimes we turn down the volume and we go with less volatility because we can afford to not have to go for as much growth. But a diversified portfolio is pretty key for what we do. So that's how they all come together for investments. This is going back to 1926, so almost 100 years of history. And it's interesting to me, a couple of things on this chart. What's done best compared to inflation? Inflation is that bottom, 2.9%, the gray shaded region. That's what causes our cost of living, that Toyota 4Runner, to go up by $20,000 over 20 years. As we looked at, healthcare is close to double that number. And what's alarming to me about that is that means that healthcare doubles nearly every 12 years in cost. If I use 3% as a number, it means that the cost of living will double roughly every 25 years. So if I know my healthcare costs are going to go up every 12 years, I've got work to do to be able to meet those costs. The very top are small company stocks, those that are worth less than $2 billion. Those are the big growers. They've averaged nearly 12% over almost 100 years. The next on that list are large company stocks. Those are the ones worth more than $10 billion. And then there's another kind of light or a darker medium blue at 8.7. Interesting to note that the 10.1 and the 8.7 are the same investments, large company stocks. But the 8.7 is if you just took the dividends and put them in your checking account and use them to live on, versus if you reinvested the dividends along the way and didn't use them to live on, then your rate of return would have been over 10% for that time frame. Then we got a pretty wide gap. So the top three up there are stocks, then a pretty wide gap, and then you've got different variations of bonds. So the top of that is ownership, the bottom of it is lending, and both of them have stayed ahead of inflation over time.
Good illustration.
Yeah, this is a helpful one. A couple other things that are interesting to me. Volatility always feels fresh and new. It's always unsettling. I've talked to clients for 12 years about what to expect in down markets, and 2022 was just like a 2x4 to the head, almost. Because I had so many clients, even though we've said, hey, how are you going to feel if your accounts are down 15% or 20%, that had the fresh question of, will I ever recover from this in my lifetime? And just not seeing a whole lot of hope. That's a tough question to walk through at that time, especially if I have clients that are approaching retirement and now they're taking withdrawals. And we'll talk about that a little bit with annuities in later this evening. What I like about this chart is it does give me an idea for how long did it take a portfolio to recover at various times. This was the worst we've had, the Depression. There's not been a harder period in the market than that. And I would say, just looking at this, that was about a 15-year recovery time frame. Second to that was 2008. That was this one right here, the financial crisis. And I've heard it said that way plenty of times, but actually now that I look at this chart, the tech bubble burst, 9/11, occurred right here, and that also took about a decade for stocks to recover. This time frame took about 5 years to recover. So I made the comment earlier that I don't ever want my clients to be in a portfolio that they have to sell just as we're going through a down period in the market like that. And that's where financial planning comes into play. What are my expenses? Do I have enough set aside in money market and cash? Do I have enough coming in for my pensions or my Social Security so that I'm not forced into a poor investment decision during a time like that? 11.8 is kind of a tough number to put my head around. There's a mutual fund that's been in existence from 1934, so it celebrates 90 years this year. And they have a chart that I don't have ready for us right now that I really like, because they go along every year and they say, what was the main geopolitical crisis of the year? And going back to 1934, right at the end of the Depression, moving into World War II, you go through the post-war boom, into inflation in the 70s, Reaganomics right into the 80s, then you get into 9/11 in the early 2000s, and then we have the financial crisis. I mean, there's a lot that's in there. There's something every year to be worried about. Should I be in the markets? Should I be invested at all? But if you zoom out and you can look at this chart, it shows the value of $10,000 back in 1934, which was quite a sum. It has grown to multiple hundreds of millions over that span of multiple generations. And that would be the reason that they would say, stay invested, is for that growth of capital. What does that growth of capital mean for us? I'm told not to love money, right? I'm told that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. For me, it's capacity. How do I impact the people in my life? What might that mean for somebody that I might give it to? What might that mean for my children, grandchildren? I have dear friends that live up north. They used to live close by here in this neighborhood. Now they live around Glen Eagle. For 20 years since my wife and I have been here, we've known them to be the house that hosts. And we've had a small group of couples that have done life together. We've been a church to some degree. We've supported each other, encouraged each other's faith. We've watched each other's kids grow. And it's at that house. There's so many good memories that are there. They never would have been able to buy that house if their parents hadn't left them a couple $100,000. Not a massive inheritance, but it was enough for them to say, hey, this is really important for our hearts. And they went and they bought a property up there that they've worked on improving, and now they've hosted. And now they have relationships that they've developed, and we have wonderful memories as a result of their generosity. They're one of my favorite examples when I think about, okay, what does capacity mean? What can that do for us? How can it help us more accurately reflect our Creator and what He's put into our hearts? So when I think about the heart behind investing, my wife can maybe handle 30 seconds of numbers, and then she gets tired of it, and she's like, I don't want to hear about it anymore. The heart behind it is what matters. So back to how we build portfolios. You've seen this slide 3 times now. There are tens of thousands of investments. The point is to filter them down. What are quality? What are efficient on cost? What do I need to achieve? What's on my heart to accomplish, and what rate of return do I need? If that can be done through CDs right now with very little risk, excellent. Let's do that. My goal is always to get that required rate of return, taking the least amount of risk possible.
Are Roth and IRAs still a good investment?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. I'm in my 40s, so I'm hoping to continue working for 20 to 30 years yet. So it's very good for me. But my clients that are retired ask that question, should I convert my money from IRA to Roth? If they're going to use it in the next 10 years, maybe it's not as important for them to convert it. If they're thinking about my children, my grandchildren might inherit this from me, that time horizon just extended, and the tax-free benefits on that Roth IRA are very good over that time frame.
Okay.
Does that help? Okay. Okay, my next slide is a sunset, which just means it's time to take a break. I see a table full of food over there. So is that okay if we take 5 minutes?
Sure. Anybody need a snack or a bathroom break? Feel free to do so.
Yep. 7:45.
Yep.
Yeah.
One. There we go. Now that everyone is refilled their snacks and beverages, we're going to get started again for the last segment.
Yeah. I don't know if I would call insurance companies a necessary evil. They're not all bad. We'll condense this part, the annuity component, and we'll spend some time on legacy planning, but I also want to park a little bit on Social Security benefits. I don't have specific details, but I can take questions on Social Security if we'd like to spend a little time there. Annuities often come up for my clients that are in retirement, and the reason they come up is because I have a slide that I'm not going to be able to pull up for you tonight, but I'm going to wave my hands around and hopefully that'll get enough of the concept across. If I had my retirement year, let's say that I was going to retire in 2050, and I had scenario A for my retirement year and scenario B, and then I looked 15 years down the road from 2050 to 2065, and I had a $500,000 bucket of money that I was going to draw from, and I was going to start taking 5% every year, so $25,000 a year, and I was going to increase that $25,000 a little bit just to account for inflation over time. And I had the exact same returns in scenario A as I did in scenario B. And what I mean by returns is even for a diversified portfolio like we just looked at, some years are going to be up 20%, some years are going to be down 15, or they'll be up 7 or down 12. I'm going to have variability in that. The risk term for that is called sequence of returns risk. So in scenario A, let's assume I start taking money out in 2050 and the markets drop for 3 years. By the time I get to year 15, I'm probably out of money with that $500,000. I've probably withdrawn everything that I can just because the markets were down those first 3 years. Out of my control, but it's the way the chips fell for me. Scenario B, if I had 3 good years instead of 3 bad years, I'm thinking about Joseph right now setting aside grain in Egypt. If I had 3 good years at the start of that 15-year period, I'd probably have more at the end of 15 years than I started with. So scenario A, I run out of money completely. Scenario B, I might have more than I started with, even after taking $25,000 times 15 years out from the portfolio. So I'm waving my hands around. I don't have any numbers or anything like that to show you on that. It's a key component to think about when we start taking money from our portfolios. That sequence of returns risk is something out of our control, but it can be very detrimental to us if it happens to go poorly. Insurance companies aren't all evil. They're tough to deal with. They can be total pains. But annuities can help guard against that sequence of returns risk. And that's probably the most common way that I use annuities within my practice with clients, is if we can put a certain dollar amount in with an insurance company, and then they say, regardless of what the markets do, we're going to promise to you, and then we have to assess, is their promise worth it, that we're going to pay you a certain level of income, just like a Social Security benefit or a pension, regardless if you live 5 years, 15 years, 35 years. We're going to continue, and we're going to take on that risk of how long it is that you live and what the markets will do. So I don't ever put everything into annuities or recommend that clients do that. But for a reasonable portion of their investments, sometimes it can really help to guard against that up and down in the market. So an annuity is a contract with an insurance company. If I had just one definition, it would be that. There are some similarities to lending our money to bonds. We put the money in with the insurance company, and then they provide certain benefits. Usually that's for our lifetime. Sometimes it can be for my wife and my lifetime, spousal benefits. There are many different types of annuities, and I'll get into that. But those benefits, why would I purchase an annuity? I mentioned the guaranteed income, which are like Social Security benefits or pension benefits. They can also have benefits for my lifetime. If I put $100,000 into a variable annuity and the markets drop and the next year it's down and it's worth $85,000 and I pass away and I have my wife as beneficiary named on that contract, the insurance company will pay her $100,000. So there can be some protection of the principal with that. And that tends to behave a little bit like life insurance. I'm not getting any multiplier like life insurance does, but I can get that protection of principal. There are other types of annuities where I know if I put in $100,000 and I commit it for 5 years, and it's based on the rate of interest that I get is based on what the markets are doing, and the markets just go down for 5 years, I'll still get $100,000 back at the end of 5 years. So not only, some annuities may have a death benefit, other annuities may have just a protection of that principal so that I could take it back in 5 years. One of the least common reasons for buying annuities would be tax deferral. They can behave somewhat like IRAs over time, but I'm not a big fan of using annuities for that purpose because they have extra costs. Again, that can be like headwinds on investments. So those are some of the benefits that go along with annuities. This is where you saw Social Security on my list. I don't have more information on Social Security right now. So let me just open it to that topic for a moment or two. Are there questions that you have when it comes to Social Security? Will it be around in 10 years? Yeah. Two components to what pays Social Security benefits. One are the tax dollars going in every month, and that makes up 75% of Social Security benefits. The other 25 is a trust fund that is depleting and is scheduled to deplete within 9 years. So unless Congress acts, which my guess is they'll probably do in the 11th hour, that trust fund will deplete, and those that are receiving benefits will get 75% of what they're currently receiving. So if I have a $2,000 benefit, it'll be cut to $1,500 at that point.
That fund and spend it on what they wanted.
Yeah.
We're not getting that back?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's why I'm not in politics. Yeah, just in the 1980s, you were told that Congress raided that trust fund for Social Security and used it for other purposes. Where's that money coming from? Yeah, and I just don't have an answer on that.
Not directly Social Security, but since pension benefits are up there as well, so many pensions are going by the wayside these days, or they're not funded properly.
Yep.
So I was interested to see it under the guaranteed income. So I know you're in the context of annuity benefits,
right.
But guaranteed and pensions in my mind don't mix these days.
Yes. No, it's a good point. One of my favorite quotes from Tolkien with Lord of the Rings is, "It's a risky business going out your door," because there's risk in everything, including pensions. So I have some clients that were in the airlines for most of their career, and they finished their career thinking, okay, I'm going to get this level of pension benefit. The airline pension went under. So the federal government has a pension benefit guarantee corporation, which will back up pensions, but they're getting about a third of what had been promised to them at that point.
Was that 9/11?
I think it was 9/11. Yeah, it was 20 years ago. And it's a good point because, are there any guarantees in life? Really, there's not. Death and taxes.
Yep.
Yeah, my guess is if Congress were going to ask my opinion, no, I won't even go there. What options does Congress have available to them? If you make more than $160,000 a year, roughly, right now, income above that is not subject to FICA tax, which is the collection bucket, so to speak, for Medicare and for Social Security. So Congress could very well just flip that switch off and say all income, regardless of size, will now be subject to that. That would all of a sudden increase a fair bit of revenue. The full retirement age has increased from age 65 when the program was rolled out in the 1930s, and life expectancy, I think, was 63 at the time, to now life expectancy is in our 80s, and full retirement age is 67. Well, that's a pretty big gap, and that's part of why the program is struggling to keep up. So might they boost that to 68 or 69 or 70 in the future? I could see that, maybe for my kids, maybe for me, that my full retirement age will be a little bit longer. Those are a couple of things that come to mind initially on Social Security. I don't think it's going away. You know, there's a social contract that's been made there. We've paid taxes in for years, and that needs to be honored. So I won't spend too much time just on opinions with that, though. Other questions on Social Security? One last thing I'll say is, if you're approaching the age when you might draw Social Security, you have your full retirement age, and you can take it early as age 62. And if you do that, you take a reduction for your lifetime in those benefits. So for me, my full age is 67, and if I was going to get a $2,000 benefit at age 67, but I said, no, I'm going to go ahead and retire at 62 and take it 5 years early, my $2,000 would be reduced by 30%. So $2,000 minus $600, I would get a $1,400 benefit for life. On the other side of that full retirement age, I could wait to take it until age 70, and then it will increase every year by 8%. And the increases stop after age 70. So in that scenario, I would grow by 24%. So now my $2,000 is worth $2,480. Am I doing my math correctly on that? It's worth 24% more than 2,000. It takes about 8 years. If I waited until age 70, I would have to live until about 78 before I would cumulatively start to see more money out of the Social Security system than if I had just started it at 67 and started taking my funds. If I was going to decide to take my benefit early and work, very bad decision, because they're going to penalize my Social Security because I'm going to have a certain level of income. If that income is above a certain level, then it would almost wipe out my Social Security benefit, depending on how high my earnings were. So that's just some context around the Social Security decision itself.
It doesn't eliminate what you've paid in. It means that it wipes it out while you're working.
Correct.
Yeah. And then when you do retire, you earn more benefits.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. And sometimes clients will take Social Security at their full age, if it's 66 or 67 or somewhere in between, and then continue to work. There's no reduction in benefits, and now the taxes that they're paying in will actually increase their Social Security benefit over time. It's a good point. Yeah. All right, we're going to condense annuities a little bit more. I have types of annuities here to consider. So what types of annuities house those benefits, like guaranteed income or legacy benefits, death benefits? Fixed, variable, index annuities, and structured. I'm not going to spend much time on structured annuities. Fixed annuities behave very much like bank CDs. I'm just not putting my money with the bank, I'm putting it with an insurance company. They're going to give me a rate of return for a certain period of time, and then at the end of that time, they're going to pay me my money back as long as they're creditworthy. I can always take out 10% of what I put into an annuity every year, and that's a law from state insurance commissioners across the country. So if I put in $100,000 with an annuity and all of a sudden I realize, shoot, I need to pull $10,000 out in the first year, I can do that without any penalty from the insurance company. Variable annuities are like mutual funds and exchange traded funds within an insurance company. So they may go up or down over time. As we've seen, they do both. They go up and down, but they tend to trend higher. There is no protection of my balance. If I put $100,000 in there, it might be worth $80,000 2 years from now if the markets were down. But I can purchase a rider on those annuities that say, okay, I put 100 in and I pay the annuity company a little extra in a fee every year. And then if the markets go down, my wife still gets the 100,000 that I put in there. Same with income guarantees. Even though the balance may be doing this every year, I can purchase for a fee from the insurance company a guarantee where they will say, we're going to pay you 6% of what you put in every year for the rest of your life, even if your balance goes to zero. So it's kind of a mix of having investments, but also having some guaranteed income along the way. I don't love variable annuities. I've used them in the past. They're expensive. All of those fees, when you tally them up, can be 2 to 3% per year, more than what you would pay if you just had an investment portfolio. You really got to weigh the cost, and it has to make good sense to be able to use something like that. The last one I'll touch on for now is index annuities. These are growing in popularity because if I put $100,000 in, I know I'm going to get $100,000 back out. There's a protection of principal. I might commit my money for 3 years or 5 years or 7, but I know I'm going to get that back out. The insurance company then takes on the risk, so they don't actually have to charge fees to provide me with that guarantee because they're taking my money. Similar to banks that go lend it out to others, they're investing in bonds. That's what they're allowed to invest in from the state insurance commissioners. And then they credit my account at a level of interest, and they can base that interest on the performance of, there's that index again. For example, how did stocks do in the US? And they might base my interest rate on some calculation of how stocks have done over the year. Question?
So you put in 100,000 and you're guaranteed to get out 100,000, but what's the upside of not earning anything on that 100,000 for that period of time?
Yeah, great question. So that third one, the performance based on positive performance of an index, what they might say is, okay, we're going to guarantee you 0. You're not going to go down below that. If stocks in the US were up 20% this year, you get to participate in that. And you're not invested in stocks, but participating means they're going to credit you interest, so your value will go up. They'll put a cap on whatever that is. They might say, hey, our cap right now is 9%. So if stocks went up 20, it exceeded 9%, you hit 9%, and now you get $9,000 for that year. Well, the nice thing is I start year number 2 now at 109,000, and now I can't drop below 109. And then we'll see where the markets go the next year. So in year 2, if the markets are down, well, I still have 109. That gets returned to me. If they go up 20% again, I get 9% on top of 109. So now I'm closer to 119 at that point. So that would be that potential upside. Yeah.
Thank you.
And of course, they're happy to sell a death benefit or income rider as well, so you can pay extra for that. And then similarly, they'll say, hey, we'll pay you a certain dollar amount based on your initial deposit for the rest of your life, even if the account goes to 0. So it's a way for me to transfer, might I live longer than I'm anticipating? And if so, will I have income? And I can transfer that risk over to the insurance company for doing that. We touched on this a little bit, but again, why is it that we use annuities? There is that legacy benefit. I might be able to say to my beneficiaries, I know at least you're going to get this, and you might get more than that, but I know for sure that the money that I put in there is going to go to you over time. There can be that legacy benefit. I might choose an annuity that gives me that protection of principal. I know I'm going to get back out what I put in or more, but not less. I haven't touched on tax deferral, and I won't go there. That's for another conversation. And then that guaranteed income. We talked about the sequence of returns risk. scenario A and scenario B where I run out of money or maybe I have more than what I started with, I don't know if I'm going to run into scenario A. And annuities can help me guard against that. So those are some of the reasons why we would use annuities. I went quickly through annuities. I'll pause there, and the last thing I have for us tonight is really just thinking through legacy planning. Questions? Okay, are we okay just to keep on rolling right into that?
As long as everyone's interest is still with you.
We're okay? Yeah, where is there? I don't know where that is. Yeah, it does. Looks like a Carolinas, maybe an Emerald Coast. Okay, legacy planning. I mentioned briefly before, legacy to me is not just what do people remember about me when I'm gone, but what is the story I'm telling them with my life while I'm living. But it involves my values, what is important to me and who is important to me. When we work with our clients, we are not attorneys. We cannot give legal advice, but we work with their team, including their estate attorneys, to make sure we know who's in their will. Do they have a will? Do they have a trust? Who are their trustees? Who are their beneficiaries? And then making sure that we get those beneficiaries on accounts is very important as well. So these are some of the components that we deal with in our office. Anticipating the unexpected. I put this up here and I left this slide in. It's a little uncomfortable for me, partly because my mom thinks it's very important to be buried and not to be cremated, but that's a separate conversation. Just looking up scripture before coming in, Paul writes in 1 Corinthians, and that's the famous passage about where, oh, death is your sting, where's your victory, right? And this is our hope in Christ. But before that, he writes, first is the natural, and after the natural is the spiritual. And in that context, we have hope, right? We have a natural body. It will be clothed with immortality. And then comes the spiritual. The first Adam brought death. The second Adam was a life-giving spirit. Also, the Psalm of Moses, Psalm 90, often is in my head. Teach us to number our days that we might gain a heart of wisdom. My own dad passed away when I was 17, so I had to deal with this early on, just as I was becoming a young man. And I know I'm going to die. I just don't know when. It's still in that category of unexpected for me. I hope to live for many decades. I might live for one more day. Who knows? But I have to anticipate what is unexpected. There is a resource in the gray folders that were handed out at the beginning of this. One of those handouts within that gray folder is called the Surviving Spouse Checklist. And it can be a very good resource just for if you are walking through death, and it doesn't have to be a spouse. It can be of anybody that you love and care for. What do I do next? What do I need to walk through? Do you mind actually if I snag yours? Thank you. So on the left-hand side, there's this anticipating the unexpected, and then if you open that, I think most of you will find in there, tucked in there, the Surviving Spouse Checklist. And if you flip through that, it just even goes into detail of what do I need to think about the first week, the first month, the first half year, and then beyond that. What are the important things to think through? And I love checklists, so I find this to be helpful. I'll reference another one of those resources in a little bit too. When it comes to estate or legacy planning, I try to keep it as simple as possible. It can be a complicated jigsaw puzzle, but if we think of it in terms of 5 different components or steps to walk through, the first 2 are make a list. And the part 1 of that list is what is known as an ethical will. And that is really where I write down, what do I care about? What is it that I value? Bear with me just a minute. I'm going to grab one of these gray folders so that I have a copy and I can reference it. So on the right side of that folder is this book titled A Family Love Letter. The company that's responsible for producing this is an asset manager that I use. So they have a good mutual fund that does good work with large company stocks in the U.S. But they provide more value to me as an advisor because they produce things like this as well. If I flip toward the back of that booklet, page 35 says My Ethical Will. And there's questions in here that are intended to get the ball rolling. They're not comprehensive, but it's a question like, when I'm gone, I hope my family will learn from my experiences. And then it gives me room to just journal and to write through that. I believe the most important things in life are, the most important thing I've done in my life is, it's my hope my family will use the inheritance that I leave them to accomplish the following in their life. Buying a home, finishing school, finishing college. The most important values and traditions I would like to pass on to my family are, and I'd like to be remembered in this fashion. So these are some topics that can start that part one, making a list, that ethical will. The second part of this list, I can actually flip back to the first page, which isn't at the very beginning, it's more like about a tenth of the way in. And this list is more of the nuts and bolts. What accounts do I have? What is my income? What do I still owe? Do I still have a mortgage that needs to be paid? Who's my team? Which estate attorney am I working with? Who does taxes for me? Do I have a financial advisor? This can be a place for my family to come and have the information to be able to contact that team. Further on through here can be documents like, do I have a will in place? Does that will name powers of attorney for me if I become incapacitated? I can't make decisions for myself. Who is that? So what I like about this booklet is it can become such a valuable tool, something that I would literally think about putting in the safe because it can contain all the information. All right, so make a list. Part 1 and Part 2 can both be found in this book. Third step, make a plan. So once I have the list done, then I need to think about how am I going to distribute assets, both while I'm living and when I'm gone. The fourth component is actually executing the legal documents. So going into my attorney's office and signing for that trust, signing in front of the witnesses. Now I've created the structure. That's the legal documents. The second one I put on there was account titling. Sometimes folks create the legal structure and they never go the extra step of actually titling assets into the name of their trust. And so all the work that they did to create the trust is of no value because the assets aren't actually being governed because they were never titled in that name. Third, beneficiary designations. Thinking through who are my beneficiaries. And the final on that list is communicate. So I don't want to simply set up an estate plan and then say, good luck, kids. I want to bring them into it. Hey, I love you. I love you guys. You mean the world to me. This is what's been important to me. This is what I hope you do with the inheritance. I want to do that initially, and then I want to do it in a continuous fashion so that they have a sense of what's been valuable to me that I hope they'll carry forward. Going into a little bit more detail, and we'll be brief on this. So making a list, we looked at what do I value and care about and what do I want to communicate, and that's that page 35 of this booklet. Again, starting on page 1, here's where you can go through your professional team, assets, personal property, debts, income, expenses, insurance, documents. Make a plan. So when I make a plan, I need to decide, am I going to do it on my own or am I going to do it with a team? Once I start to make that plan, thank you, then I can look at identifying, okay, who are my beneficiaries? Who are going to receive assets from me? And then stop to think, what do I hope it will do for them? We can go into details like, what are they going to owe in taxes? What type of account structure will I leave? Is it going to be a Roth IRA where they'll have to withdraw it within 10 years, but it will all be tax-free for them? What if they're inheriting it and they're in their 40s or 50s and they're in their highest earning years at that point of their life? Does it make sense to leave them an IRA, which is fully taxable, and more of it will go toward taxes at that point? Or should I pay the taxes now and convert it to a Roth so that they receive tax-free assets? That's a conversation that's worth having. So there's many things to consider there, but the key things are, what do I hope this will do for my beneficiaries? What do I want it to accomplish for them? Once we've gone through identifying and considering, then it's a matter of mixing and matching. Which accounts go to which beneficiaries? The goal is what's going to be most valuable for them. So those are sub-steps under that making a plan. Key documents to consider executing. And the nice thing about this is there's also a list of these documents. It's not verbatim, but it is here toward the back of this resource. And it's also at the very beginning. So I'm just a couple pages in. It's a Roman numeral 3, and it says Fundamental Estate Planning. And this is written in narrative form, but each of the documents are listed there as well. So there can be a checklist for you to go through and say, okay, do I know what these are? Do I know how they're going to perform in my estate plan? And do I have them done? Are they finished? The final step then, we've made a list, we've made a plan, we've executed documents. Now, do I want to communicate that? I want to communicate to my kids. Not everybody does, and that's okay. That's their prerogative. But if I do, what's the setting that I'll unveil that to my kids? I want to think about timing for them. How might they receive the news of this estate plan that I've done? Will I ask for feedback? Maybe I won't. If I do, is it going to be feedback on the whole plan or just certain components of my will? And then when I think about future communication, did I set up education accounts for my grandkids, and am I going to be active in actually writing a check for their college tuition? Is that going to be occurring while I'm living? Or am I going to wait for this to be revealed at my funeral? So the other resource that I did not touch on in this folder is that Anticipating the Unexpected. And the subtitle there is Involving Your Family in Investment Planning and Decision Making. So this can also just be a very good resource for walking through that conversation with your loved ones. My card should be on the right-hand side here. That's a way to get a hold of us at the office. So if any of this tonight has spurred questions, whether tonight or a month from now, feel free to reach out. You don't have to be a client for us to answer questions for you, to have a conversation. It's important for us to treat you like a client, even if you are not. So you have an open door with us. We can be a resource for you. So we covered investments, financial planning, annuities, touched on taxes, Social Security, inflation, legacy planning. Thank you for your attention. That was a lot of content.
Let me shake that hand before you turn it around.
Yeah.
Now, in your hands, these materials can be quite valuable. This wasn't just a sit and get, but this is a sit and absorb and take with you. Some materials that you might look at later on. Don't wait too long, but they will go, yeah, I remember that. I need to get to that. And for me, it's really helpful in structuring the needed steps for Cheryl's protection if I should predecease her. And yeah, so I think this is family. We all love each other and want to provide for each other. And I endorse Doug because not only is he a brother, but he does what he says. You don't have to be a client. You can just have a question. And he's very generous with his time to help people in different kinds of needs. So that's all we have for tonight. And we hope you enjoyed this second episode of Heart Song Cares seminars. And thank you, Doug, for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Enjoyed spending the night.